okay, what does it even mean to be a man? What is masculinity? What is manhood? How can I understand who I was created to be? We keep it locked and anchored in, and no one is allowed there. And it's the part of us that at our core is who we really, really believe we are. And this is where fierce empathy really was birthed, is I had to give it to myself first. I had to be willing to look myself in the mirror and say, I'm going to speak the hard truth and love to this man that I'm staring into his eyeballs.
What do you mean by fierce empathy? I know that's a term that you throw around and you use, and so I'm very curious what that means, because I think a lot of guys know it's important to be empathetic, but maybe have some negative or softer connotations when they think about being empathetic.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's a great question, Ryan. So if I go back through my history, when I first took, we hear about personality tests and different things like that, right? Some people are familiar with Clifton Strengths Finders. You've got MBTI, you've got Enneagram. There's a lot of different personality tests. When I was 15, I took my first test, and that was not something that the results was not very thrilled about, because every single one of my top strengths, which was communicated to me, were hardwired, were all of these what we call soft skills. My number one was empathy. And for any guy that's listening, you can imagine being a 15-year-old kid who's hyper competitive and loves to, loves to get out there and make things happen. I was very athletic. I was an outdoors kid. I grew up in Kansas, so hunting, fishing, loving every day. You don't want to find out that your number one strength is this squishy word called empathy. And so for me, there was this tremendous resentment for many, many years. And I ended up taking that same test by Clifton Strengths Finders over the course of 15 years, basically in 5-year intervals. And what was interesting, Ryan, is that it never changed. My number one strength was always empathy. No matter how hard I tried to escape it, I was like, okay, God, what is going on here? Why is it that I have this gift that feels like I'm constantly taken advantage of? I'm constantly used. I'm constantly being all things to all people. And so my construct and understanding of what empathy was, I didn't realize was very skewed. It was very, very skewed, because to me, empathy was this very soft, very genteel, very emotional, very huggy type of word, if you will. And so I didn't understand that for most of my life, the way that I understood empathy was actually a form of enablement, is that I wasn't actually being honest with people. I was saying all the right things. I was able to wear the masks. I was able to show up and be exactly who I needed to be, because I convinced myself like that was the best way to love people, is to help people. And so fierce empathy didn't come until much later, where I started to understand that my perspective on empathy needed some modification. And I realized that I had been lying to myself. I had been lying to other people. I didn't have any courage. I was terrified of what speaking the hard truth in love might actually look like, because of the fear of rejection, because of wondering whether or not people were going to accept me or allow me to be a part of the crew anymore. And so it was this discovery process to where eventually I have a working definition now, Ryan. Fierce empathy is being fiercely committed to what you believe, but simultaneously being willing to create an environment where others feel seen, heard, understood, known, and loved. And so what that looks like is that if you and I are in relationship, and that's the foundation, we have to have relationship. We live in a world where everyone thinks that you can hold each other accountable with no relationship. You can call people out on their shit. You can try.
I mean, that's just unsolicited advice, and nobody ever in the history of mankind has appreciated unsolicited advice.
We don't understand that in the world we live in for some reason as a culture. And so in the context of relationship, if I truly love you, Ryan, you don't want someone who's always telling you what you want to hear, right? None of us need that as men. We need men around us who have the courage to say, bro, I love you, I see you, I hear you, but you need to be aware of this, and I need to speak some hard truth right now that you desperately need to hear, because your perspective is skewed or because you're making some poor choices. You're not in alignment with the standards that you've set for yourself, that you've communicated to me. And as your brother, I'm going to speak the hard truth in love. So that's where the fierceness comes, is saying I'm going to be fiercely committed to speak the hard truth in love and to cling to what I believe and enter a dialogue. But I'm also going to make sure that I'm creating this environment where there's safety, which a lot of times we as men, we don't really do that.
It makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking about those things and how you define empathy versus fierce empathy, I can't help but think that you, at some point, maybe even you have called yourself this, one of these recovering nice guys.
Oh yeah, absolutely, my man.
Yeah. I heard some things that you had said in that definition. I thought to myself, oh, this is somebody who you got walked on, you got stepped on, you got pushed around. The interesting thing about the nice guy is there's a misconception, I believe, that this is a passive, cowardly, timid weakling. And maybe there's some element of that, but more than anything, this is a manipulative person who is very, very selfish, but they don't display it in what we would generally consider a selfish, braggadocious, arrogant way. They're a lot more subtle about it, and it paints itself as kindness when in all reality it's just selfishness.
It is 100%. It's a false humility. It is the nice guy syndrome, and there's a great book on that. No More Mr. Nice Guy, from some I'm sure you're familiar with, is a great one. But we don't realize that we live in a culture and a society, and I love, our missions are very similar, Ryan, in that our goal is to help reclaim so much of what has been lost through passivity and through fake and through manipulation. And I was that guy. I was that guy who I thought I was the nice guy. I thought I grew up in a religious household, so I believed that, I was supposed to be a good Christian boy. And I was a good Christian boy, except I was lying to everyone, including myself.
How did that? So, and I want to talk about both, to others and to yourself. We'll get to both of them. But when you say lying, let's just take to others, for example. How did that actually look? Like, what is it that you were saying? What is it you were doing? What were you lying about? Because I think that's kind of a catchphrase that I hear a lot. I was lying to people, but nobody ever explains, what exactly do you mean, and how did you catch yourself doing it?
Absolutely. So you can't, one of the hard things about this is that when you're consistently lying to other people, most often you don't realize it. Like, it's your subjective truth. And so you're not actually aware or consciously aware that you're lying to people. And in my opinion, you can't actually become aware of that until you have someone who literally like decks you right in the face with the truth, objective truth, or until you realize that you have been lying to yourself all along. And so here's what this looks like, is that a very simple example, I'm sure we've all experienced this, is when we're going out to eat with, your wife or your girlfriend, and she leans over and is like, hey, where do you want to go get food? You're like, well, I don't care. Right? And then you can get into this little tussle back and forth. It's like, I don't care. Where do you want food? Well, I don't care. Where do you want food? And then a guy starts listing off. You want to go to Carrabba's? You want to go to Olive Garden? You want to go to Ruby Tuesday? She's like, no. That is something so simple that as a man, we don't even realize that we are literally lying. You may not think that it's that big of a deal. You do care. You do have an opinion. And for me, I got convinced that I was trying to love people well by being accommodating, never sharing my opinion, never sharing my thoughts, because I thought, I was fully convinced, Ryan, that it was my job to elevate everyone else around me and invalidate myself, because that was some form of asceticism, some form of altruistic, religious, good Christian boy, what I'm supposed to do. And what I didn't realize, that because I was so deceived around my relationship with myself, everything I was saying was really just lying. I was just literally telling people what I knew they wanted to hear so I could look better in their eyes, but I didn't realize how much that would destroy my soul. And it led me to the point where I ended up in the bathroom ready to end my life with a Glock in my hand.
I definitely want to get to that. And so I don't mean to move away from that, but you said something else, which is kind of ironic, that we talk to people based on what we think they want to hear. But the ironic part is that when you actually communicate your true intentions, your desires, your hopes, your fears, your dreams, that's actually what people want.
Yes.
They don't want. So for example, to use your example about going out, your girlfriend says, where would you like to eat? And you say, I really just want to do something quick and easy tonight. Can we go get Jimmy John's? She always has the opportunity and the option to say, yeah, we can do that. I was really hoping for sushi tonight.
Yep.
And you can still say, hey, you know what? Sushi's good. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
You shared what you wanted. You were willing to accommodate. you had an opinion about something, and I'm telling you what, the first time you do it, if it's in a very non-confrontational way or something maybe seemingly insignificant like where to eat, this is just a pleasant surprise for women who are with guys who don't communicate what they want, because she doesn't want to decide either. Like,
it's
make
leadership.
a decision.
It's leadership.
Right. And if she feels like, hey, I'd rather do something else, well, she's a big girl. She can open her mouth and she can say that. And then I can make a decision as to whether or not I'm set on Jimmy John's or if I'm good compromising on this dinner and going out for sushi.
Right. And it translates to so much more than just our everyday occurrences. It shows up with, you mentioned relationship with self, like the constant lies, the simple lies, like I'm not going to snooze tomorrow. I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to take some time to, get away from myself. I'm going to do, like, guys, we're notorious for this. We say it all the time, what we're going to do, and we don't do it. And in any relationship that we have with other human beings, if you're consistently lying in that relationship, you're going to fracture trust. And then eventually it's going to destroy all respect until it gets to the point where there's literally no confidence. You have no confidence in the relationship anymore. But guys, we forget it's the exact same thing for ourselves. This is why so many men are struggling. I saw you recently had an episode on, there was some anxiety stuff, depression, all these types of things. I am fully convinced now, Ryan, that the primary underlying cause for so much of the turmoil that men are dealing with today is because they're just lying to themselves. Because that's what happened to me, is that I was saying I was going to do all these things, but when you are constantly telling yourself you're going to do something and you don't do it, you're going to fracture trust. So guess what? When you fracture trust, it means you don't have self-trust. You don't know what voice to listen to. You don't know if it's your feelings. You don't know if it's your emotions. You don't know if it's God. You don't know if it's the enemy. You don't know what voice to trust internally because you're fracturing it. Eventually, that destroys your self-respect until you have zero confidence and you can't even show up and you're just literally tossing and turning in life. And that's what happened because I didn't realize that I was lying. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. He says, tell the truth, or at the very least, don't lie. It's one of his 12 rules for life. And I absolutely love that because it may be hard to tell the truth. It's uncomfortable to tell the truth. And it is very confrontational to tell the truth. But until you start doing that, or at the very least, stop lying, you are going to live in what I think is Thoreau talks about life of quiet desperation. Yeah.
Yeah. I've often said that, when you don't keep the commitments to yourself, whether it's something that you see sounds unimportant, like, oh, you know what, I hit snooze today. Or you flat out lie or maybe deceive somebody or take advantage of somebody or manipulate them in some way. A little bit of your soul dies.
Yeah.
And maybe dies is too harsh, but a little bit of it flees. And I use the word flee instead of dies because you can get it back, and you get it back by honoring your commitments to yourself and making yourself more capable than you were before. It's not like it's dead and gone forever. It's just not available to you if you keep loading those little deceits and lies up to yourself and other people.
Yeah. Well, real quick, Ryan, on that note,
go ahead.
I would contend too that it does have to do with dying. Is that if we look at natural life, like just anything in nature, it's either growing or it's dying, right? And I think that there's something to be said about what you just mentioned about, it's not fully putting to death, but if you are dying, right, you are diseased, you are headed towards death. The eventual outcome of a man not keeping his commitments and word to himself, which is exactly, I'm sure we'll get into this, where I ended up. The next logical step was actual death, because I had been killing myself, dying a little bit every single day because I was just trying to live according to what everyone else said I was supposed to do and keep up all those appearances. And so it is a slow, gradual death until, you do die. And I think it's one of the fastest ways that men end up where we have a society today where 84, 85 men every single day take their own life here in the U.S. because of this. And you know the statistics. I've heard you talk about them all the time. The statistics don't lie. And I think it's because of this one thing, is that we don't know how to tell the truth, or we don't know how to handle the truth.
So when you were at your lowest point and obviously sitting with a pistol in your hand ready to pull the trigger, all of this had been culminating and adding up, I imagine, over years and years of not honoring your commitments, feeling horrible about yourself, losing self-respect, maybe losing the respect of other people. Was there some external circumstance that pushed you over the edge, or was it all just internal dialogue? What was that like? What actually happened where you thought, today's the day or tonight's the night?
I've been asked that question dozens of times on shows where it's like, hey, was there a moment? Was it this, wake up call? And I've taken years now reflecting back on this story and how it got to that point. We all do that. It's like, how did it get to that point? Like, Ryan, I know you've been very vulnerable about your journey. I'm sure there's been times of the last year or so where you've said, like, how did it get to this point? What did I miss?
Definitely.
How did I go? Like, and so you're oblivious to it oftentimes in the middle of it. But I love that we can look back. And what I traced it back to is that when there was a series of events that happened in my early teenage years that I didn't realize how significantly they affected my life. Right before I turned 14, I'm a Kansas farm boy at heart. I grew up out in the fields, cows, horses. I was Opie Taylor. Give me a BB gun and a fishing pole. And so for me, my childhood I thought was beautiful. But we moved to Florida, suburbia, right before I turned 14. And over the course of 2 years, there was a series of events where my dad walked out, or so I thought is what it felt like. He did leave, but to me, it was interpreted as like my dad doesn't want to be a part of my life anymore. So the masculine father figure that I had, I felt abandoned. And immediately the man who stepped into my life was a youth pastor at church. And I wouldn't find out till much later that there's this term called grooming. He molested me for years. And so I had not only a father figure who I felt like abandoned me, I had a new father figure who stepped in, who took advantage of me. And so my entire construct of what masculinity was jacked. And I know we don't have enough time to go into too much of the story, but suffice it to say, like, my first thoughts of suicidal ideation were when I was 16 years old. There's a place called the Sunshine Skyway down south of Tampa, Florida, connects to St. Petersburg. And I was on the road, literally on the way. I was going to drive off this bridge at 16 years old because I had been, there was too much pain from a very young age. And now I've got a great relationship with my parents now. I know that they would be okay listening to this, but I grew up with a very, very passive father and a very, very narcissistic mother. So the empathy part of me, I started to understand and learn as I grew up and as I went on, was because of the environment. I started to learn how to read people, which now serves me really well in my career. I literally get paid to read people. So it's a really powerful tool. And I found that this pain and this difficulty, it informed so much of my paradigm and so much of how I saw the world. And so I had probably a 10 to 15 year period, what I call the dark ages. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. So what did I do? I did exactly what everyone says you're supposed to do. I went into the workforce. I built the 6-figure job. I got the glass corner office. I got the company car. I did the whole thing. And by the time I was 25 years old, I had achieved what everyone said you're supposed to do to win in life, at least as far as the corporatized American dream.
Right.
And it was then that I started dealing with the suicidal ideation again. I was having anxiety all the time, panic attacks. I was depressed. I was about 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. I was married, had a kid, all of it. And I found myself, it was a Sunday afternoon. And all I could think was that the pain was too unbearable and my wife and my daughter would be better off with the life insurance money. And so I walked in my bathroom and I held it. It was a Glock 43 for those who are interested in the details. Very small little concealed carry.
Yep.
I used to wear it on my ankle. And I stood there and I will say that it was a divine intervention because I heard a couple things very distinctly in that moment. I heard God say to me, and I believe it was God, he said, buddy, I love you, but I can't fix this for you. And Ryan, to hear that when I had been told my entire life to just pray, Jesus, fix it. God, fix it. I had lived so much of my life active in ministry. I'm actually technically a pastor, which is kind of funny. I went to Bible college. I did the whole, my life came to a standstill in that moment, because when he said, I can't fix this for you, it destroyed my entire paradigm, because that's how I'd been conditioned to believe, is that just give it to God, right? And what followed, though, is what changed everything. He said, you get to decide. You get to commit. You get to become. I am with you and I am for you, but I can't fix this for you. And it was in that moment, through a series of events, and again, I'm, trying to minimize too many unnecessary details, is that I realized that I had pawned all of the responsibility for my life, for my success and my failure and everything that had happened. I had believed a lie that said, I'm exactly where I am right now because this is exactly where God wants me. And my weight and my mental health and my relationships and my financial situation, everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. This is what God's will was for my life. This was what life was supposed to look like. And I didn't know why I was suffering, but that was my lot to bear. And so I know this is a long-winded answer, Ryan, but it was a combination of things that happened from my childhood, series of events, stuff that happened at my work, panic attack driving down the interstate going 80 miles an hour, like all sorts of things that led me to this moment. And the one thing that I can say is, between that and somehow, I still don't know how in this, I can only give glory to God for it. I had enough awareness to know I need to get a mentor. I need to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, more capable than me, more successful than me, healthier than me. And that's when I finally committed to the process of saying, I'm going to invest in getting in rooms and around people that have and are living, at least to some degree, the way that I want to live. And that's where it started, a process of turning right back around, headed straight back through hell, and had to clean up a whole lot of shit.
Yeah, I bet.
So
a lot of reconciliation. Is that what it was when you say clean up a whole lot of stuff? Is that what you're talking about, or what was it actually that you needed to clean up?
It was reconciliation. It was healing my relationship with myself, Ryan. The entire foundation. Like, I hated this man. I could not look myself in the mirror. And I'm sure there are guys listening, it's not even delicate language. You get really, really artistic with the types of profanity you can use when you hate yourself and you're talking to yourself.
Well, and you know exactly how to hurt yourself too.
Oh my gosh.
You know the right things that are going to sting. I was talking with a friend of mine. He would say stuff to himself internally as a punishment. Like, nobody else was trying to punish him. The world wasn't trying to punish him. God wasn't trying to punish him. But he felt so horrible about himself that he felt like he deserved to be punished. So he did it to himself, verbally and emotionally.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where most men are. And that's why guys get to the point where, things get really, really dark. And they, which is why I have such tremendous respect for Order of Man and what you do, Ryan, is that we live in a day and an age where most men, they don't have a safe place to go to where they can talk about this stuff. They're not allowed to talk about it at church, because guess what they'll get? Guilt and shame. How dare you? I can't believe you're dealing with you have so much to be grateful for. Look at your wife. Look at your job. Look at your car. What are you complaining about, right? All of this stuff that men end up carrying. And for me, I didn't realize that what I had to do is I had to go all the way back to when I was a boy. And I had to heal the things that I had basically, when I was 13, that's where everything shifted for me. My childhood disappeared. My childhood ended. I moved a couple thousand miles away from my entire upbringing, and then went through a series of events that, frankly, I don't wish on any young man would have to go. I know you've been through stuff, Ryan, from your childhood, where that's part of why your mission is what it is. I mean,
not to the extent of what you're talking about. Like, I would never put what I went through on the same. And look, we don't need to compare woes, and I don't recommend that anybody does that. But also, I know that the things that I've gone through are pale in comparison to being, molested as a child by somebody who you're supposed to be able to respect. So, yeah, different level of struggle for sure.
But I think what happens, and this is even a great example, is that we live, like even with the men that we connect with, is that we're spending so much time like licking wounds and comparing scars, and no one's healing. No one's actually healing. And I know that this is something that you stand against too in the men's movement, is that there's so many people that are just positioning and posturing and projecting, and it's disgusting and it's frustrating. And one of the things that I've always respected about you and that I really admire about you is just your constant vulnerability. I mean, like, guys, I don't have this all figured out. I've learned a few things, and I'm happy to share with you what I've learned along the way. And I'm happy to guide you through the terrain that I've navigated, but I don't have all the right answers. And that humility in the midst of the leadership is what is so powerful. And so for me, what I had to do, Ryan, is I had to go back through and I had to reassess and redefine, okay, what does it even mean to be a man? What is masculinity? What is manhood? How can I understand who I was created to be? And it was a very systematic process over about 3 or 4 years where I took my health back. I took back my relationships. I took back my financial situation, all through the help of coaches and mentors and community. And it was something that I had to reconcile this part in my mind. And this part in my mind was this little part that I think, and not just in our mind, we all have it as men. We keep it locked and anchored in, and no one is allowed there. And it's the part of us that at our core is who we really, really believe we are. No one else gets to see that. Just like you talked about your buddy, your friend, and how he talks to himself, I had to start healing my relationship with myself and give myself permission. This is where fierce empathy really was birthed, is I had to give it to myself first. I had to be willing to look myself in the mirror and say, I'm going to speak the hard truth and love to this man that I'm staring into his eyeballs. But I simultaneously need to stop doing what I've been doing, which is layering on the guilt and the shame and the condemnation and beating him up, because that's not working. And what's interesting is I don't treat anybody else that way. Why do I give myself permission to do that, right? That healing allowed me to completely change my identity, and it allowed me to, I love the Bible talks about this, is love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love yourself, every attempt at love for your neighbor is a perversion of what it could be or what it should be. And so we've mastered as men being able to love our kids and love our wives and love community and show up for everybody. And everybody's freaking wearing masks, man. Because they can't look themselves in the mirror and say, you know what? No pretense, no arrogance. I truly believe that I'm becoming a better dad every day. I truly believe I'm becoming a better husband every day. I'm becoming healthier. I'm becoming wiser. I'm becoming stronger. I'm becoming the man that I want to be, that I said that I would be. And that's the process I'm still in to this day, my man.
Yeah, I mean, it's a never-ending process, right? It's not like you get there and then one day you're there and you check it off the box and then you can go on about something, a lot more fun than doing internal work. When you talk about knowing who you really, really are, and that was something that you hit on pretty deeply.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I could ask who are you and how do you define who you really are? And also secondary to that is, how does a man begin to uncover who he really is? Because a lot of times when you hear that, it's like, okay, you see the video going around, like, say the weird thing, right? Or engage in that weird hobby, or do those quirky behaviors that all of us have.
Yeah.
Like, sure, okay, yes, but that's not really who we are. So how do you define and then work towards uncovering, unpacking who you are at your core?
It's a great question. Sorry, that's my beagle, in case anybody heard that.
That's okay.
It's a great question. And so what I'd start is this, is you walk down the street and you ask 100 guys, what do they want? And they can't tell you. Now, you might get some answers like, well, I want $1 million, or I want more sex, or whatever it is. But what's interesting to me is that most men can tell you everything they don't want. They have a very, very, very long list of what they don't want in life. And I was that way too. And it was one of my first coaches actually sat me down. We were at this little Mediterranean restaurant eating shawarma and a bunch of food that I can't pronounce. It was one of those beautiful, like, main street with the big glass windows, like the cars are driving by. And it was just this interesting moment where I'm sitting across the table and this question is posed that catches me off guard. looks at me and says, David, who do you want to become? And Ryan, in the moment, it was not even, I didn't even have time to mentally process the question. This came straight out of me involuntarily. I said, I'm not allowed to answer that. I'm not allowed to answer that. And it was really interesting because my first coach was a woman. She looked at me and she said, that's really interesting. Why can't you answer that? Why aren't you allowed to define that? And I didn't have an answer for her at the time. She said, well, let's simplify this. When you look at the men that you look at the people around in your life, like who inspires you? Who would you say, like, I would like to create a life like theirs? And I just kind of tongue in cheek, I said, well, Jesus. And she said, no, wrong answer. You can't say that. Because I was, again, my entire life, very, very traditional conservative upbringing. And
that's what you're supposed to say. I mean, that's the answer you're supposed to give.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah. And I said, well, and she said, no, pick somebody else. And I said, well, honestly, I feel like I'd really like to be like Tony Robbins with a few less F words, and I don't want to travel as much as him. She said, okay, great. Awesome. Why? And I said, I don't really know. And so that was one of my first exercises, is that I had to start formulating an understanding of, like, looking at, when we look as men, what we do is we can look into society. And I know there's a lot of men that follow you, Ryan, that look at you, that find you inspirational. Now, the hard part about comparison, as we know, is everyone says comparison's the thief of joy. It can be, but that's where people stop. People are like, comparison is the thief of joy. Don't ever compare. I'm like, no, that's wrong. Stop saying that. Stop saying.
I mean, it's the same thing with, you talk about Jesus. All Christians will say, I want to be like Jesus. Well, is that comparison?
Right. Exactly.
Is that the thief of joy, or is Jesus the source of joy? Like, which one is it?
Exactly. And so it's looking at men, for guys, those of you that are listening right now, you might look at Ryan, or you might look at me and say, man, I admire something about him. Awesome. That's great. We love that. What you have to do is answer the question, why, and what are you willing to sacrifice to get it? And making sure you understand that even though we might have something that you don't have, our hope, I know the reason that we live, Ryan, is because we do want to inspire other people. But the only way that I can be inspired by you or any other man is I have to compare myself. I have to compare myself when I look at his marriage, when I look at his body, when I look at his finances, when I look at his situation. I have to have a healthy comparison. And this is where guys really jack it up. And this is where we miss it, is that we're looking at, and we take this very defeatist mindset. And we're like, well, I'm never going to be like him. I'm never going to have that stuff. And he's lucky, and look at his opportunities, and look at all this stuff. And that's where, yeah, comparison can be the thief of joy. But if we instead shift it and say, no, who inspires me? Find, guys, for those of you listening, who in your network at your church or your community, who do you know that's been married for 60 years? Who do you know that is 80 years old and still out mowing his lawn? Who do you know that still has a great relationship with his kids and he's well into his 50s and 60s? Like, look for those men and find out they are doing something right. Tony Robbins, this was part of our training. I did some speaking, and I was a head trainer for Tony for a season of life. And one of the things that he always says across the board, success leaves clues. You're never going to find a man who's ticking every single box and say, like, he's successful in every area. If he does, he's trying to sell you some shit you don't need. And he's lying to you. Because we all have our blind spots. This is why community is so important, why accountability is so important. So for a man, like brother, if you're listening, anyone's listening, and you're like, I don't know how to make the changes. I don't know who I am. You have to take the time to really take a step back and define what you want in life. Because in order for you to get clarity on what your character really is and who you really are, you have to be willing to look in the mirror. Looking at Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz teaches this. You have to be willing to become aware of your default reactions to life. If you have the ability to step back and say, wow, I reacted in anger there. My reaction was to get pissed off over here. My reaction was to say something this way. My reaction was to do whatever. When you can start becoming aware of your reactions to life, that will show you who you currently are. But then you have to formulate a vision for the man that you want to become. And the only way that you can formulate a vision for the man that you want to become is you have to look at the men that are out there and say, okay, I want to take that, and I want to take that, and I want to take that, and I want to take that. And you formulate a vision for the man that you want to be. When you start formulating that vision, Proverbs talks about this, where there's no vision, the people perish. I think that's how men are. If we don't have a vision for our life, you're just going to wither. You're going to perish. But if you capture that vision, this is who I want to be as a husband. This is who I want to be as a father. This is who I want to be as a leader. This is what I want my health to be like. This is what I want my business to be like. Now we actually have something that we can align with every single day, and we stop setting stupid arbitrary goals, and we create daily standards, which I know you appreciate and respect as well, Ryan, is daily standards. If it's not aligned with the man that I said that I would be, it goes. It's out. It's gone. That's where you start to maintain this discipline, this consistency, which will help reveal to you part of who you are. But the most important thing that I would say is this. You need to sit with your father, not your dad, not your human father. What I had to do is I had to curl up in my father's lap, God's lap, and say, God, who do you say that I am? And I spent 30 days bawling my eyes out, saying and writing out in a journal, saying, God, who do you say that I am? And listening and writing it out. And every time I'd write something down, Ryan, I'd say, that's bullshit. That's not who I am. I'm this. I'm this. I'm this. You don't even, who are we to argue with God, number one?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But he's saying you're loved, you're chosen, you're worthy. I've made you approved, right? You're a son, you're an heir, you are a king. Like these are things that I always wanted to believe to be true about myself, but I would call bullshit on. I was like, there's no way that that's who I really am. And it wasn't until I started to allow that to become a part of my identity that it shifted my behavior. And we know that. Runners run. Why? Because that's their identity. If you identify as a failure, if you identify as an addict, if you identify as whatever it is, guess what your behavior is going to flow from? Your identity. So I had to do all of this work to reconstruct my identity and create alignment with what was useful for the life that I wanted to create. And the way that I figured that out was by looking at the lives of other men that inspired me.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great way to say it, and I also consider just borrowing from other people. A lot of guys will listen to this podcast or be in your community, be in my community, listen to other people, and they don't feel like they're where they want to be. And the solution is just borrow from that guy who has what you want.
Exactly.
Like if he doesn't drink, then you shouldn't drink.
Yeah.
If he gets up at 5 a.m., then you get up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
If he makes and I did this early on in my financial planning practice. I was about to fail out of it, and I was about to leave the business. And I thought, I'm too stubborn to do that. So I thought to myself, well, what else can I do? And so I reached out to this guy who was just perpetually successful in our office. And I said, look, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure this out. I have no idea. And eventually we ended up partnering, and I would split business with him. At first I was a little hesitant because I wasn't making enough money as it was. And now all of a sudden I'm bringing somebody else in. And he said something very poignant. I'll always remember. He said, 100% of zero is zero. I'm like, that's a good point. Like I can keep all the commission to myself, but I'm not making any commission, so it doesn't matter. And I started making a lot of money, but really it was interesting because I had a few people suggest at the time, man, you really sound like this guy, or you're starting to talk like him, or you're starting to present like him, or you're whatever. And they would say it tongue in cheek, almost mockingly. But of course, like, how could I not end up being like that person? That's who I'm borrowing from. And then eventually you create your own identity and it becomes your own. And you start to mix and meld from different personalities and different traits and skills, and you become your own person. But if you don't know where to start, just copy somebody who has what you want. That's it.
That is it. And it's the premise. Like if we go back, we've been doing this for thousands of years, but for some reason, the last 100 years, we forgot it. It's the principle of apprenticing with a master. You find someone who has a degree of mastery in something in their life and you become their apprentice, which means that your feelings don't freaking matter anymore in that context. Your feelings, they don't matter in that context. If you want to create a healthy lifestyle, then find someone with a healthy lifestyle and start modeling their behavior. That's what apprenticeship is. It doesn't matter that you don't feel like waking up at 5 a.m. That's what you have to do if you want the result, right? Same thing with business, same thing in every area of our life. And I love that you mentioned, because Todd Herman has a book called The Alter Ego Effect, which I love recommending to guys that are kind of in this early stage of trying to figure out who am I, is that he talks about how when we are trying to create this identity, we forget sometimes that we show up differently in different environments, and it's not always wearing masks. Sometimes it's wearing hats, right? The Ryan Mickler that shows up here for the podcast is it's not that you're a different person when you're around the campfire with your closest homies, but there's a different version of you that shows up for that because of the context, right? There's a different version of you when you take the stage. There's a different version of you when you're showing up for your boys, when you're coaching them. And so the alter ego effect, what I love about it is that it allows us to create and take things from people, like you're saying, borrow from people. And I remember when I first started speaking, that's exactly what I did. I wanted to channel my inner Tony Robbins, but you know what I found out within about 4 months of doing that? I didn't like it. There were certain things I liked, but I was like, this isn't me, man. I don't show up like this, his deep voice thing. I'm like, that's not who I am, man. Like, I laugh and I have fun and I'm a goober. And I realized that the discovery process came because I started modeling and then I started making my own way, which I think is all artistry, is that you learn from a master and then you start to make it your own. And the only way that you can start to do that is you have to wrestle with discomfort. You have to be like, I don't really like that. That's not who I want to be. I don't want to be, drinking every single night before I go to bed. I don't want to be looking at that stuff on the internet I shouldn't be looking at, right? It's not useful. I don't want to be the guy who's sitting on the couch while his kids are playing out back, throwing the ball around. I don't want to be the guy that is struggling in business for 15 years. I don't want to be. And so we have to be willing to look at those things, detach emotionally from them, and then step into fierce empathy and say, okay, what's the hard truth? Speak the hard truth in love while simultaneously creating an environment for yourself where you say, hey, I see you, David. I love you, man. You're okay. Everything's all right. You've done some stupid stuff. But this isn't aligned with the identity you said you want to create. So we need to make some adjustments, and here's where we need to fix and tweak and so on and so forth. And here's where we need to change our environment. You start to do that, and it's just like nature. You plant the seeds and you will harvest what you plant as long as you're patient and consistent. It's not going to happen overnight, and that's what we all hate. We all wish it would happen overnight.
Yeah, I know. Everybody's like, just tell me the 3 things. I wish David would just get to like the 3-step formula, and then in 30 days, I'll have exactly what I want. If that were the case, I'd be out of a job because I would just give it to you and you would never need anything ever again. And I wouldn't need to do it because I'd be successful doing something else or, whatever it looks like.
I can't do real quick, Brian. Let me interject one other thing. We can't do 30 days, but I can tell you that there is a 66 day. And this is the average, okay? It's between 21 and 90 days. But what people misunderstand is that you can only pick one thing. You can only pick one thing. You cannot transform it all, but you can pick one thing. And this is scientific research. You can read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. You can read Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like anything to do with actual habits is on average, it takes 66 days. And if you pick one thing and you commit to do it, regardless of how you feel, for between 21 and 90 days, it's different for everyone. The average is 66. Yeah, you can have what you want, but it's you only get to pick one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is interesting because you look at, like our 90-day plan or Andy Frasilla's 75 hard, right? It all ties into the numbers that we're talking about right now, and just building those habits. I was going to ask you about going back to empathy. I think it's clear why having empathy for yourself is important. And I would suggest that it allows you to move on in light of past mistakes and things that you've done wrong and offering yourself some grace and forgiveness for what you've done or what you perceive yourself to have done. Maybe it's more, so feel free to interject. And also, where does empathy for others come into play? And is that something of value that more men should learn to develop in themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm understanding, just to repeat back your question, you're asking, so the importance of it for ourselves, but then how it's developed for other people. Did I hear that correctly?
Correct. And yes. And why or why not is it important that we would develop empathy for other people, not just for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the things that I learned early on when I was a kid, my dad had a vet clinic, and he's a veterinarian, not a veteran. But by the way, thank you for your service, brother. But my dad was a veterinarian, so he worked with animals, and so one of the things that I learned from a very young age is that when you're dealing with an animal, you have to create an environment of trust before they will ever do what you want them to do. We live in a culture and a society where everyone wants everyone else to do whatever we want them to do. You look politically, you look at in marriage, you look at your kids, right? The number one cause of anger, frustration, offense, like all this stuff is because they're doing something that I don't think they should be doing. Right? So we want control and it triggers us, right? Or somebody says something or does something or takes a stance against something. But the only way that we're going to create the transformational change, and we know this, politics is probably a great example right now. We no longer have an environment where politically we can have civil discord, where you can argue and fight over ideologies and beliefs and opinions, because everything has been minimized and resorted to character assassination. If I believe something and have an opinion on something, then I'm not allowed to share that. Especially, we know this, we're both white guys living in the United States of America. There are certain things we're, according to culture and society, we're not allowed to have opinions on. Now, I disagree with that. I think you do.
I was going to say, I don't really buy into that. Anybody who spends any time on my Instagram account knows that I almost might seem like I wake up trying to piss off people. I don't, but it doesn't seem to be a problem for me.
It doesn't. And that's what's beautiful about the work that we're doing. But if you look at the macro, that's not supposed to be something that's happening because of the status of our nation.
Agreed.
Right? And so the reason that that's so critically important is that unless you create an environment where someone feels safe, where someone feels understood, where someone feels heard, we cannot hope to be able to change their mind. This is why, like, I love Charlie Kirk, and I love the stuff that, like, you see a lot of these people that are going out and they're standing for, and they're saying all these things and they're getting in debates and arguments. The problem with that is that it doesn't actually cause the other person to change their mind. It doesn't.
Just want to dig in.
They just want to dig in, right? And so, for ourselves, if you don't have empathy for yourself and you're willing to create that environment where you allow yourself to feel pain, you allow yourself to go back through and to process and to forgive yourself, you're going to dig yourself in more and more and more and more and more, instead of creating this environment just like with animals, where it's, hey, I've worked with horses before, I've worked with dogs, I've worked with my dad being a veterinarian, I've gotten to touch all of them, right? You have to create an environment of trust if you're going to get them to do. Otherwise, what do? Use force. And force is where most men make the majority of our mistakes, is that we're using force on our children or force on our wives or force on society or force on culture. And what ends up happening is that we don't understand that our power, not only is our power to heal, but it's crushing. We are crushing so many people and we don't realize the collateral damage. Or you have the opposite kind of guy who's just a pushover. He doesn't use any of his power. He doesn't use any of what God has placed inside of him. And so this is a long-winded answer, but to kind of summarize here, if you are not willing to create an environment where other people feel seen, heard, understood, known, and loved, don't expect them to give a crap about your opinion, because they won't. Because their subjective reality, which is not objectively true, their subjective reality is their truth. And you are bringing something that's in direct confrontation, and unless they feel safe, it cannot be received by them. And so what's interesting, and why this translates to your secondary question of empathy for other people, is that I now exist in a world where I can literally love human beings who I vehemently disagree with, and can create an environment where we can have a conversation and they actually can hear what I'm trying to say. And it causes them to take a step back and be like, I've never really thought about it that way. Now, this doesn't exist on social media, as I'm sure you know, because everybody's keyboard warriors. And it's very hard because it really only works in the context of intimate, close relationship. So this is why I tell people, stop trying to solve all the freaking world problems and have a conversation with your neighbor. Invite your dudes over for the fire pit. Have coffee with a friend. That is where you're going to create the most transformational change. And I know that you agree with this too, is that for most of us, it's around the dining room table. It's not out here on the computers. It's not here on social media. You're not going to affect change. You're just going to cause people to get more and more entrenched. And so this is one of the reasons I've always had problems with like social justice warriors and the keyboard warriors, is like people think that they're affecting change, and they're not. Because the only way that I change my opinion, and the only way that you change your opinion, Ryan, is if you feel and I feel like, hey, I was actually heard. Someone actually took the time to understand where I was coming from. This is true in marriage. This is true with our kids. We have to create those environments. And that is where I believe the importance, yes, the importance of it. That's the only way that transformation happens, in my opinion. It's the only way that we can change.
When you're talking about this, especially with regards to social media, one of the things I was thinking as you started to answer that question was it doesn't exactly create viral content. You know, like you look at somebody like David Goggins, who's just so confrontational and just angry all the time. Now, I've sat down with David and we've actually had a really good conversation, and I saw a side of him that he doesn't portray all the time and a lot of people don't see. But you look at somebody like David Goggins or Donald Trump, or, you know, even Tony Robbins to a degree. They take these, and I think Tony Robbins probably has a lot more empathy than the prior two examples I gave, but they take these very non-apologetic, hardline stances, and that's what creates these viral moments. It happens in social justice, like you're talking about, whether it's Antifa or BLM. It's all confrontational. It's all hardline stance. It's all us versus them. And I think this is where a lot of guys have a hard time, because there's people who don't see eye to eye with you, and then there's your enemy.
Yeah.
And those are two different things. There are people who are truly your enemy. Like they want you dead. They want to see you destroyed. They want to perpetuate evil across the globe. Those are that's our enemy. And then there's people who are homosexuals or transgender, and, you know, these other things that maybe I don't necessarily agree with. Is that my enemy? I don't think it's my enemy. There's things I don't agree with. Those things I'll fight against, but it's a hard thing to do, especially when you're on social media, to delineate the line between people you disagree with and people who are the actual enemy.
It's hard because there's no established relationship. And when you don't have established relationship, you can't actually have dialogue. There's no trust. And without trust, like we think of any relationship, anyone that we have ever had tremendous respect for that has changed our paradigm or our perspective on life, it has only been in an environment where we felt like we could trust that other person. And so if you don't have the ability to create that depth of relationship with another person, you're literally wasting your breath trying to convince them. Use your energy for other things is what I tell people. And that's what I have to be careful of that too, which is why a lot of times, like if people look at my socials, I'm not hyper controversial, right? It's not because I don't have very strong beliefs about things. I'm just like, this isn't useful. I'd much rather take my time and energy and go somewhere else where it's going to be useful. And namely, you know, the people that I actually serve, you know?
Yeah.
Just, so
anyway. Well, and that might be where our personalities differ, because I like to poke the bear a little bit, and I don't mind doing that. Not because I think it's productive, just because I think it's kind of funny sometimes and enjoyable, but maybe that's the more immature side of me coming out.
We all got to find our way to have fun, though. So it's
for sure. Well, David, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got a hard stop here in the next few minutes. Will you let the guys know where to connect with you and learn a little bit more about the work you're doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone can check out davidwaldy.com. You can find me on social media, and would love to connect. If you mention the podcast, shoot me a message. I've got, I'd love to give you some free resources, things like that. Let me know that you found me through Ryan. And Ryan, thank you, brother, for honoring me with your time and giving me the opportunity to be here. It's been a blessing, and I appreciate you, bro.
Likewise, man. I love these conversations. They're powerful. And I remember when we started doing this almost 10 years ago now, to be able to have conversations like this, and 10 years later, over 500 interviews like this, and I'm still learning. So I really appreciate you taking your time too.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
All right, brother.